Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm Glenn Martin. I'm here with my co-host James Haskell. And in this episode, we're going to review the most recent coach interviews. So Coach Harbaugh, Coach Roman, Coach Horton, and Wink all did interviews over the last 2 days. Harbaugh did his yesterday, and the other three did theirs this morning. And so, with most of these coaches' interviews, you don't get a ton because they're all very good at saying a lot and saying nothing at the same time. But we did have some notes that we took down and wanted to share with you guys, some highlights from the conversations, if you will. So I guess we'll start, Jimbo, with Mr. John Harbaugh, the head coach of all this. So let us know, did he say anything interesting in your opinion?
Yeah, I'll tell you the most interesting thing that he said was the reference to Lamar having a run-in with the jet ski. To me, this was the most interesting thing to me. And just another example of the way John handled it 100%, in the most professional, correct manner. He just basically said, hey, look, that's a conversation that him and I had. We're going to keep it private, keep it between him and I. But knowing that they had a conversation is good. And it's really important. Just confirming that they did have that talk. Not that, look, I'm not sure John doesn't want to come off as a coach as, hey, Lamar, don't do this, don't do that, live in a bubble, don't live your life, whatever.
Yeah.
I think, just like with the Patrick Mahomes basketball video, if you remember that was, I think, last offseason previous to them winning the Super Bowl. Sometimes you just need a little bit of a reminder because, you go from a starter to an MVP in 16 games and it takes time to catch up with you.
Yeah.
You don't realize what you've become and how valuable you are to a team and their success. And so I was most happy to see that they had a conversation. And then one other thing I'll mention is that John also mentioned that he respects Lamar's opinion on the fact that Lamar said that they might have been sleeping a little bit on the Titans, but he doesn't necessarily agree with that. I think it just shows John's experience based on the years he spent around the league and around football in general. Much easier for a person of that age and that experience to not overlook a team in comparison to. I don't blame Lamar for looking past the Titans at all. He was excited. He was, feeling it, and I don't think it actually affected the outcome of the game.
Right.
So anyway, those are two notes, both related to Lamar, just by happenstance. But what about you?
Well, I just wanted to expand on yours because, he didn't say a ton that came as a surprise, but. Yeah, it's a tough conversation to have with a guy who's 23 years old, at the height of coming off the MVP season, and also has that kid-like spirit about him where he wants to have fun and that's important. I think that Yonda touched on that this was maybe the most fun he's ever had in his long career, and that's including years where they had more playoff success than they had last year. Now they had the most regular season success, but not the most playoffs. So it's tough to say because, you're right. His body now is a multi-million-dollar investment that he's putting in his own body, basically. So his body is his job in a way. So from the outsider, you see he kind of puts that a little bit at risk by doing that, jumping over the jet ski. But at the same time, you can't live life, like you mentioned, in a bubble. You have to – he's still 23. He's going to what's abnormal about a 23-year-old throwing the football around on a beach? With his friends, that's completely normal. And so, do I want to see him doing bungee jumping and all that stuff? Maybe not that, but if he's going to throw the football around on a beach, you kind of got to let him do it. But you say at the same time, try and be as smart about it as you can and don't do anything. You're not winning the Super Bowl on that beach, so don't do anything crazy. But no, so I agree that's kind of a tough spot for Harbs, but I'm glad he didn't share the message. He just kept that private.
Yeah.
And then, I think it is good that he acknowledged that Lamar felt that way because everyone knows that it's any given Sunday, especially in the league, that any team could beat any team. Some teams have bad days, and you catch a team on a really good day. And normally, maybe 9 out of 10 times that them two teams would have played, maybe the Ravens win 9 of those, but not that day. So John just has a more experience. He has so much more experience. He has a better understanding of that any given Sunday. And a guy like Lamar, who was 22 years old, I believe at the time, MVP, feels almost unstoppable. So I don't see anything wrong with it, but I certainly understand John's point of view of the fact that they didn't take them lightly, because I'm sure none of the coaches did, but some of the players could have. I think that's completely normal. I mean, we've all played at some level, and you feel at some point when you're playing at your best, you feel almost unstoppable, even at the lower levels that we played at. But so I didn't really have much else to talk about from John's.
Yeah, just a lot of, like you said, playing politics and saying a lot and saying nothing at the same time. Yeah, we can move on to the next one. Who's up next?
Cool.
About Roman?
Yeah, Greg Roman was up next, and he's a professional at talking and not. I mean, because they, the reporters asked him about Lamar, of course, and they tried to nail and drill you down onto if there was one specific thing that you wanted to see Lamar improve on, what would that be? And of course, he just said, if there's 50 things a quarterback has to be good at, if he can get 2% better at all 50 of those things, then you'll see improvement. So he didn't really answer much, but what he did say is that I found interesting was that he said that due to less on-field or grass time, as the coaches called it, less on-field practice time, they have to make sure that they use their time to be more judicial in how they use their time, because he said there was plays last season that they were practicing that they never used in a game on the field. So I find that interesting, Jimmy. I mean, how many plays do you think that they had that they practiced throughout the year, and what was the scenario or situation that they were waiting for to deploy these plays that they practiced all year and never used?
They're all the Justice Hill plays.
Come on, be nice to Justice.
No, I'm giving him a hard time, but no, it's so weird because I think you go throughout a whole season, and of course the coaches prepare for any scenario, but what scenario did we not face, right, in order to deploy a certain play? So it makes you start thinking, like you said, what were those plays, and why were they not run? Were they not their favorite? Were they not, I don't know, were they really extreme scenarios? I don't know. I mean, we're talking about we're down by 4, we're at our own 30 with 2 seconds left. What are we doing with the football? Stuff like that. So, but the one thing I think is interesting, like you talked about being more specific as to how they spend their grass time this year. I think that it's really going to be to our benefit that we have very low turnover on the offensive side of the ball, just on the team in general, and then obviously the coaching staff. And hopefully those plays can turn into a runway for what ends up being this year. Do you know what I mean? I mean, hopefully that they're useful enough plays and they're not just garbage plays to where we can stand on the shoulders of those plays and work into this season in a truncated time period. So that's what I'm hoping for. I mean, if this is getting the ball 50 times in the first 3 weeks, then I don't want that.
I don't think you have to worry about that. But yeah, I just found it interesting that he mentioned they practiced all year these plays that they didn't get to use. So it's just interesting that they use that valuable practice time. Even though they had more of it last year, it's still every year it seems like the practice time gets shrunk by veterans negotiating through the Player Association. It seems like every so many years they have less practice time. So it already had a limited time, and it's interesting that they chose to use that on plays that never saw the field. But maybe those practice plays help other plays. Like, in other words, even though the play might not be exactly the same, it still has elements that are the same. Like maybe the linemen still do similar things to other plays, and maybe it's just not who gets the ball. That might be a little different. But, yeah, I found that interesting. And then another thing I found interesting that he mentioned that I hadn't thought of yet is certainly with baseball and football, it seems that when training camp starts, the defense has a bit of an edge. Certainly with pitchers arriving earlier than hitters, seems like hitting needs timing. And the same with offense. Timing is very important on the offensive side of the ball, from whether it be the receiver or the quarterback to the receiver, or obviously on the offensive line, timing is extremely important as well. So he mentioned that this might not be a year for record-breaking offenses statistically. So it got me thinking, Jimmy, how much do you think this limited practice time and all this, how much do you think that will benefit defenses? And could we see a swing in the sense that way less offensive production this year and maybe a resurgence of great defenses?
Yeah, it's a really good point and a really good question. I think that I can totally see that happening at the beginning part of the season, like you said, to give the time, the offense the proper reps to catch up. But the only thing that still stands true is that as the NFL has gone on and leaned towards offense-heavy teams, and the rules are still in place that the defense loses.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard for the defense to win. But I can totally see that in the beginning of the season. I think there's going to be some sloppy games. I think there's going to be some big mistakes. But you know what else that makes me think of when he says that? I wonder if Harbs does this. He, in the media, sends messages to his team, right?
Absolutely.
I wonder if – do you remember the 73-win Warriors, right? They really went after those 73 wins.
Yeah.
And obviously you could tell there was some fatigue aside from the miraculous comeback of the Cavaliers. There was some fatigue in the playoffs, some mental, emotional fatigue. Yeah, exactly. So I wonder if they're sending a message as a coaching staff and Roman in general saying, look, the record books are great, but maybe that's not our focus this year. We need to win football games and win when it matters. I don't know. It just that came to my mind as well, because the next year the Warriors came out and they completely, were head on about that record and said, look, that's not our focus at all. We need to get the job done, right? So not saying that we were – I mean, in a lot of ways we were a record-breaking team. We weren't the Warriors in that sense, but we did something that had not been done in a number of decades, if I'm not mistaken. So I think
the greatest rushing attack in history.
Right. So, and hadn't, we broke, it was like the 74 record or something crazy like that. So that's a long time. So that's what it made me think of is to help the players shift their mindset from just that to something bigger and something more important, which is, winning the Lombardi.
Oh, yeah, it certainly could be that. It also could be, you mentioned the amount of players that were coming back. It also could be a message like, look, don't rest on your laurels. Yeah, we were a great offense last year, but that doesn't mean anything for this upcoming season. So if you want to be great again, it's going to take work. You're not going to walk in, show up, and still be that number one offense you were last year. So, yeah, no doubt. So that's about all I got from Roman. Was there anything else you got?
No.
Okay, so moving on to Chris Horton as a special teams coordinator was definitely the shortest of the four, which is obvious. What's that?
Good reason.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, I mean, his unit spends the least amount of time on the field. But one thing I found interesting is he was asked the same question that a lot of the other guys were asked, and he actually gave an answer. So he was asked to drill down if he could just say one specific area he'd like to see improvement. He didn't give everything's got to get better answer. He actually gave an answer. He said that he wants to see an improvement in the return game. And I think both of us have said on different occasions that this return game has not really been anything since the departure of Jacoby Jones. I can't remember, maybe one or two since Jacoby, one or two individual returns that were good, since Jacoby, and that's a long time ago. So, I'd like to see an uptick in average return yards for both, but certainly for kick return. I think we were underperforming in that category, and we're helped out by the fact that we had a record-setting offense that we're able to overcome not the best average starting position. But he also mentioned that Prochet might be an option at punt return that could help with that. He said he has great hands, and the one thing he stressed about a lot of these guys and a lot of the coaches stress is that he absolutely loves football, and I think that's the utmost importance. I think every team wants a guy that isn't just good at football, but absolutely loves it, and that's all he can talk about. And he said that about Prochet. So maybe Prochet will give him a boost at punt return. It's going to be interesting to see who ends up being our kick returner. I think that guy has to have dual threat ability. He has to be able to help in other areas other than just kick return in order to make the team. So it'll be interesting to see. But, you noticed that too, right, Jimmy? The lack of return game we've had over the years.
When you get to the point where it's like literally every kick, I'm standing up. I'm not even on the couch because it's such a, nerve-wracking play that I'm standing there just saying, catch the ball. And that's it. Just catch the ball, right? Like, that's it. So, but the only thing I get nervous with Prochet, I agree with what he said about him as far as, the description of Prochet, but I get worried about a young guy, late-round guy coming in and pressing a little bit, like wanting to do too much, create something that isn't there, and end up putting your team in a hole and things like that. So I do get a little nervous about that, but I hope he does give us a little bit more of a threat. But hopefully he remembers that, look, man, just catch the football and don't do too much. Like, let it come to you, right? But yeah, I mean, and then Wink's interview to me was the most entertaining. I don't know about you.
Of course.
I took some mental notes listening to Wink. And the one thing I'll mention is I love the coaches. He talked about the most, but I think all the coaches are doing it. They're want to make Zoom an event. They're want to create a competitive advantage between them and the other teams right away, adapting to Zoom, right? Like if you apply this to business, you innovate or you die, period. Yeah. That's how businesses work. Look at Toys R Us, right? And that's how it works in the NFL as well. You innovate or you die, period. That's what it is. So them wanting to turn these things into an event and doing different like series and events and bringing guests to engage the players, I thought that was super cool. I think that you have some names of some of the guys that they brought in, but I thought that was just awesome right off the bat.
Yeah, it's an impressive list of speakers, and I tell you, it's not one or two. I mean, I think I missed a couple, but this is the names I wrote down: Sage Steele, Jerry Rossberg, Dr. J, who was, as he put it, Michael Jordan's Michael Jordan, right. Which I loved Wink putting it that way. Coach John Calipari from Kentucky, Eric Weddle, of course. And I thought what was interesting he pointed out with Eric Weddle is that as fans, we don't see the inner workings of each organization, not even the Ravens as much as close as we follow them. But he mentioned how Eric talked about the differences of working for the San Diego Chargers and the LA Rams in comparison to Baltimore and just the special place that the Baltimore Ravens have here. So I thought that was really cool. He talked, DeMarcus Ware spoke, and Wink compared his leadership to that of a Calais Campbell. The fact that DeMarcus Ware was asked to bring his leadership from the Cowboys over to the Broncos, and that Calais is also being asked to do that, and how he can do that, and just gave him a little bit of, I guess, advice. Then they had I didn't catch his name, but they had a Navy SEAL come in.
Yeah. And
they mentioned that he got the most questions asked by the players and was really inspiring. I hate that I missed his name, but I was watching it live, so I wasn't able to go back. But, yeah, so then they had Ray Lewis and, of course, Ed Reed. Big Tony Saragusa, who said that he is a Hall of Fame teammate, is the way he described him. And yeah, I mean, just a guy that you would love to be around, and I can imagine because he's one of the funniest players that we've ever seen. And then to top it all off, the icing on the cake, Rex and Rob Ryan coming in. And that had to be interesting. I'm sure they were shotgunning beers, and like they're just seemed like the funnest group to be around. And Wink gave their father praise, saying that their father, Buddy Ryan, was maybe the greatest coordinator in the history of the NFL. So yeah, and I missed some guys. So just an incredible list of speakers that talked about their challenges. And also I didn't write down, but I believe they had the mayor on also, and he spoke of the challenges in Baltimore. So yeah, they had a lot of great speakers, and I'm sure man, I just didn't know they had that many. Like, I knew that they brought in speakers, but I had no idea that the list could be like a dozen people long.
Right, and that's the cool thing that Wink talked about, because it kind of came full circle at the end of the interview. They asked, how is it that you've been, or what have you learned from using Zoom and using these different technologies to interact with your players? And he talked about how even when they get back to regular OTAs and stuff like that, he said in the following year, he wants to keep using that because the likelihood of getting people to speak to his players using that without having to leave the convenience of their home is much higher. So you can get more people than having to get them to travel out and things like that. So he said he's going to continue using that, which is absolutely awesome. A couple of the notes I took from it, I mean, I guess you would expect him to do this, but he just flat out said that Calais Campbell's the best 5 technique player in the NFL, which was cool. And then he talked about Queen and kind of having a little bit of a setback based on the situation that we're in right now. But, and you mentioned this is kind of his famous saying is that, if you make a mistake, make it at 100 miles an hour. So I think that progression from week 1 to like week 4 is going to be really interesting to see with Queen and Harrison. And in fact, that's my only concern about the team right now that I have is that while we don't have a ton of turnover on the offensive side of the ball, you mentioned it, defenses are going to have an upper hand in a lot of cases this year based on lack of practice time. But our defense has a lot of main contributors are new, or young, whether new as in rookies or new as in vet acquisitions. So that'll be interesting to see as well. But yeah, I mean, those were some of the things. I'm trying to think if there's anything offhand that I really liked about Wink's interview. Anything else you took note of?
Well, yeah, just one more thing about the Patrick Queen. Him mentioning that he's a little bit behind. And already a hard position to transition, especially with a guy like Queen who is expected to become a 3-down linebacker, whereas Malik Harrison tends to be more of a 2-down guy and maybe has a little bit easier road. The one thing that Wink pointed out about Queen is that he doesn't repeat mistakes, so that certainly bodes well for him. The fact that when you teach him something, he can quickly apply it to the field and doesn't need a ton of reps to do so. So that certainly helps Queen, and everything I've heard is that he's an extremely smart player as well as instinctual. So I think that, you mentioned that we do have some new guys, and with the defensive line getting Wolf and Calais Campbell, and then the young linebackers, and that's true. But we also do have a lot of continuity on the back end. Pretty much our entire secondary is the same as it was last year. I don't think there's any difference in the secondary. So while they do have some newcomers up front in the front 7, they definitely have the continuity on the back end that I think could overcome it. And honestly, I look at our roster, and I don't think there's any reason that defense can't be top 3. So the only other note I got was that due to the lack of grass time, as they called it, it has given the coaches more time to scout the opponent's coaching staff as well as scout themselves, which if you take advantage of that time, which I have no reason to assume that the coaches here haven't, it could give you more of a schematic advantage in some ways, this lack of practice time, just because you have so much more time to review tape and review tendencies of the coaches and coaching staff. So I think that it's interesting. It would be interesting to see how schemes are implemented, because while you have more time to maybe innovate and come up with new ways to use your players and new schemes and stuff that we haven't seen before, you have less time to implement them on the practice field and give that information to your players. So it's going to be interesting to see how the schemes are different this year. Like, do they use a more basic scheme because they don't have a lot of practice time, or do they have more time to figure out a way to enhance the scheme but make it more teachable and make it easier to learn? I think that's the thing that John always stresses about the system here in Baltimore, is that it's such a teachable system. It's so easy to teach this to the players, which makes their job easier, which allows them to play at a much faster speed, which is crucial in the NFL. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they use their limited time that they do have this offseason.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We like you said, I think we gleaned the most information from Wink, and I'm really excited that overall they're turning the Zoom things into an event and trying to gain a competitive advantage out of it. But if you guys have any other thoughts or comments based on the coaches' interviews, whether it's John, whether it's special teams coach or either the coordinators, feel free to let us know if we missed something, if there's something we should take a second look at. But make sure to leave your comments, make sure to leave a like, and probably most importantly, make sure to hit the subscribe button. We really like doing these things and like having you guys along for the ride. So make sure to hit subscribe, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
See you.